Bill.
Well, what a great crowd for a snowy 4:30 Friday afternoon. This is fabulous. First, I'm David Pryor, Director of the Institute of Politics. We want to welcome you here. We have had an absolutely fabulous conference that began last night. I'm going to tell you just a little about that. There's going to be a continuation of it in just about 5 minutes. But first, we have two very special guests tonight, and I don't see them here, but I think they're here. One is Frank Fahrenkopf. Frank, where are you, please? Frank Fahrenkopf, would you please stand? Frank Fahrenkopf is the, among many things, is the former chair of the Republican National Committee, and he is representing today the Presidential Debate Commission. That's pretty important. They're selling tickets for the next year's debate, 4 years from now, if you're interested. Okay, the next special guest is Paul Kirk. Where is Paul here? He's not here, but he was here all day, but maybe he can come back later for our conference. He is also representing the Presidential Debate Commission, and Paul is the former chair of the Democratic National Committee. Well, let me just say first that all of us in this forum today are a part of recording a very critical event in our young century, the history of the presidential campaign of 2000. We're also part, all of us together today, of writing a book. We're going to write it together, and we're going to begin it this afternoon. It's going to be hopefully published by next summer, and it's going to be about this unique campaign for the White House in the election of 2000. Since 1972, here's the 1972 manual, 8 elections for the White House ago, the Institute of Politics has hosted the Campaign Decision Makers Conference, bringing together on this campus campaign managers from all of the campaigns to dissect and go behind the scenes into the strategic and tactical decisions on the road to the White House. This conference, since 1972, has been sponsored by the Institute of Politics. It began here last evening, and it is the rarest of rare chances to share the high and low points of the political campaign for the presidency, what went wrong, what went right, and sitting with the managers of the campaigns are the journalists, the national journalists, who covered this campaign and brought this campaign to our attention. They daily covered the trips and the flights and the hotel stays, etc. They reported on the speeches. Many times it was exciting. Oftentimes, I'm sure, it was pretty boring and a lot of wait time. Also at our conference, we have some 60 observers who sit at each end of the room. For example, our friend Richard Fenno, Professor Fenno of the University of Rochester, who is a past president of the American Political Science Association and a wonderful and dear friend of mine and many in this room. Many of the students who have had the opportunity to sit as observers and who will sit again as observers tonight and tomorrow during our conference, some of those students may themselves someday be the subjects of a future campaign decision makers conference. We hope so. That's what the Institute of Politics and the Kennedy School of Government is all about. All sessions that we have are transcribed, but they're considered off the record, with the exception of this particular forum for an hour and a half. And that will be so until the transcription of our book is published in book form. Here's the last one, 1996. Political campaigns, I think, and I've been involved a few of my own, are the heartbeat of the American political system. In this 3-day conference of campaign decision makers, we have the rare opportunity, you have the rare opportunity, to help peel away the fluff and even the sometimes glossy facade of a political campaign. Overwhelming schedules, crisscrossing the country, minute-by-minute decisions, raising the money, speeches, consultants, hotels, airports, buses, media, bowling alleys, plant gates, pressing the flesh, all eventually merge and culminate into the magic of Election Day, which in the year 2000 became Election Month. What a rare and treasured chance we all have today to hear and see the people who drove these campaigns, who ran these campaigns, and who made the daily decisions that ultimately ended up in the White House. 1972's book, I will read just a moment from Ernie May, who was then the director of the Institute of Politics. Those who had the opportunity to see the forum 13 days, just a couple of nights ago, Ernie May was the gentleman sitting right here where Professor Isaacs was. He wrote, "As a rule, Neither reporters nor historians learn how the drama on stage was produced or directed or how the scenery was set, unquote. Today we're getting ready to see how the scenery was set. In 1996, David Broder, who was a participant in our conference at that time, I'm sorry could not participate in this conference. He wrote, "As the power and prestige of campaign managers have risen, they have become in a real sense the new bosses of American politics." And this conference has become increasingly important as a forum when they drop their guard at least a little bit to disclose the workings of their mind and the values by which they are guided. Today, in order to bring these campaigns together, in order to stimulate discussion, and we're going to open it to questions very soon, we have asked our very good friend Maxine Isaacs. Maxine spent several years with Vice President Walter Mondale as Communications Director. Many of you in this audience today have taken her course on the American President. She is adjunct lecturer at the Kennedy School, and she is a friend of all. Also, we're proud to announce that she is the faculty advisor for the Kennedy School and the Institute of Politics for the Campaign Decision Makers Program. Maxine Isaacs.
Thank you. I think David gave you a wonderful feeling of what's going on in this conference, and I want to introduce our 5 participants here right away so that you can get a sense of real political people talking about real politics in our time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our panelists. I've asked them basically to address one question, but they should feel free to do whatever they want, basically. And then about a half hour into it, I'm going to turn to questions because I think your questions to them will be what'll be really stimulating and fun here. So, I'm going to introduce all of them at once. I'm going to begin with Teresa Amato, who is at the far end there. She has been the campaign manager for Nader LaDuke 2000. Before that, she was a litigator with Public Citizen and founded a Nader-backed group in Chicago. She is a 1986 graduate of Harvard College, you'll all be glad to know, and she was an active member of the Institute of Politics Student Advisory Committee, but I'm told that she started her political career in high school when she organized a walkout when a teacher was barred from speaking at a student assembly. So welcome, Teresa. We're delighted to have you here. Donna Brazil, I hope many of you are getting to know. She is now a fellow at the Institute of Politics. I take some credit for that because she came and spoke to my class, and as soon as she finished, I took her by the hand and I said, I'm going to take you to the Institute of Politics where you belong, and lo and behold, here she is. I also did the same thing with Rick Davis, who was here last semester. So Donna was the campaign manager of the Gore-Lieberman campaign. She's worked on every Democratic presidential campaign since 1980, and last year she was named Campaign Manager of the Year by Campaigns and Elections magazine. She served as Chief of Staff to D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, and as I said, she's now leading a study group at the Institute of Politics. Rick Davis served as the National Campaign Manager for Senator John McCain's 2000 presidential campaign bid. I must say he probably was, as I said, he was here last semester, he probably was one of the most successful, popular fellows they've ever had at the IOP, and we keep bringing him back, which is great. He was Bob Dole's deputy campaign manager in 1996, and he's a managing director at a political consulting firm called Davis Manafort in Washington, D.C. And my note says he still has a large following of McCainiacs on this campus. Gina Glantz was the campaign manager for Bill Bradley's campaign, and for the last, and go ahead and applaud. For the last 15 years, she's been chair of a company called Martin & Glantz, which is a national consulting firm that deals with issues such as, deals with groups such as Hands Across America, the campaign to prevent handgun violence against kids. And Karl Rove is now the senior advisor to the president, a title any of the others of these would have been very happy to hold. He's responsible for the White House Office of Political Affairs, the Office of Public Liaison, and the Office of Strategic Responsibilities. And that's a new office, right? He was the Bush-Cheney campaign's chief strategist. He was part of what was called the Troika with his two other colleagues, and he was president of his own business, Karl Rove and Company in Austin, and he has taught at the LBJ School of Public Affairs and at the Journalism Department at the University of Texas. So please welcome our 5 guests. Thank you. My question to them was a pretty simple one, and it's one that we've been talking about in a general way upstairs, and I thought they should share this with you. The question is, they used to say 100 senators look in the mirror every morning and see a president of the United States. And the question is, at some point, somebody who believes in a certain set of issues and believes in his own possibilities or her own possibilities steps forward and begins this process of running for president. And very few people, as we know, make it even to the primaries and these are the people who get them there, help to get them there. And so I thought beginning with Teresa, I thought I would ask you, what was in your mind, what was in your candidate's mind as you began this process and said, Ralph Nader, I can be president of the United States, and here's why. And I'd like you, and if you can tell us a story along the way, all the better, but we'd love to hear your version of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ralph Nader was the last candidate to enter the presidential race. He entered about almost exactly a year ago, February 2000, and he did so because he had spent 4 decades in Washington, D.C. fighting on behalf of the people to restore the sovereignty of the people over the sovereignty of corporations. And what he had seen over the course of time was it was a lot harder to get things done, and a lot harder for civil society, that is, to get things done because there was so much corporate cash in the political system. And this corporate cash was keeping our politicians beholden to their corporate paymasters. We have more than 100 million people who choose not to vote in the United States. They don't like their choices for candidates. We need more democracy, not less democracy. And he wanted to build a third party, the Green Party, as a grassroots movement from the ground up to actually run with citizens across the country who are trying to get things done in their communities. And in the course of this, he intended to remove the political barriers there are to entry for third-party candidates. For example, ballot access hurdles, because you have to get on the ballot in all 50 states. And there's hurdles that are put into place by the state assemblies, which are dominated by Republicans and Democrats. And these hurdles would make dictators in other countries blush. They're so unbelievably obstructive to have competition, third-party competition in the political process. And so he wanted to do that, and he wanted to get into the presidential debates and be able to put forward a platform, an agenda that was different than what he viewed the two parties, which he called a corporate party, really, with two heads wearing different makeup. And if he wasn't going to get into the debates, he wanted to expose the Commission on Presidential Debates for being an exclusionary gatekeeper to tens of millions of viewers who wouldn't be able to hear alternative third-party voices. But when you're a third-party candidate, you don't get much coverage by the media. You get ignored. You get shut out from the political process. You're not able to raise your issues. So we decided to just take it straight to the people and go with super rallies and hold these massive rallies across the country and talk to folks about what they cared about. And that was the...
Let me ask you one question, Teresa. Ralph Nader doesn't have the personality of somebody who you normally think of as running for president. He's got a set of issues that he's deeply committed to, and but he's not somebody who you think of that wants to be. He's not a touchy-feely kind of guy, right?
He's not a politician.
Right. He's not a typical politician. All right, I'll give you that.
He's not a politician.
So was it simply on the strength of that set of issues that set him forward, or was there something that we couldn't see as easily in him that wanted to be out there with people making that case?
Well, when he announced, he said, look, I find the whole political scene somewhat distasteful, and he was not the kind of candidate who was a career politician in any shape or form. He had worked with nonprofit organizations. He was a consumer advocate. He fought, for consumers and citizens, taxpayers, voters, shareholders, et cetera. And so he was not in the political framework, but he decided that it was so hard to get anything done anymore in Washington, D.C., like he had done in the 1960s, that it was necessary to raise the effect of corporate cash on our political system, and to say that, look, I'm going to go straight to the people now and I enter the political arena because civil society is having a harder time of taking control in Washington, D.C.
And how did it happen that you came to be his campaign manager? Did he come to you and ask you to do this, or were you colleagues for a long time and it was a natural thing, or how did this come about?
I had worked at the Public Citizen Litigation Group in Washington, D.C. Shortly after getting out of law school, fighting government secrecy by bringing Freedom of Information Act cases, and ran a clearinghouse called the Freedom of Information Clearinghouse, which would help journalists, citizens, others get information out of the United States government and sue the government when they fail to provide information or were behaving in a secret manner and not allowing the taxpayers to see the information that they had. And so then shortly thereafter went to Citizen Advocacy Center, started a community lawyering project, and it was a grassroots project, exactly the kind of grassroots projects that Ralph wanted to connect with all across the country, because this was going to be not a top-down third-party campaign, but a bottom-up third-party campaign.
Great, thank you. Donna.
Thank you, first of all, Maxine, who I've known for many years, and Mondale Ferraro years, and let me also thank Gina Glantz, who at a very young, tender age, when most people are thinking about careers and big business and others, Gina actually helped to nurture me and mentor me and teach me how to target voters and also how to organize. So I appreciate Gina's guidance in my young, tender age of 20-something. Now that I'm 40-something, I can talk about young people. Let me also thank the Institute of Politics, Senator Pryor, Ms. Pryor, and all of the staff, Kathy, and everyone for allowing me to be a fellow, and of course to all of the students who had an opportunity to vote and actually count all the votes and allowed me to come here. Appreciate that. Paul, that'll be my last dig at counting all the votes. If I can sit long enough, maybe I won't stand up and talk about it.
As long as you include the military ballots.
Absolutely, and all of the counties. Absolutely, all of the counties. The undervotes and the overvotes. This is war stories, folks. And politics is about war, waging war, but also it's about trying to convey to the American people a sense of purpose. Al Gore sought the Democratic nomination in the White House to improve the lives of working families and their communities, to protect and preserve Social Security, to also invest in education and clean up our environment. As you all know, he's a Harvard grad. He went on to serve his country in the military in Vietnam, went back home to Tennessee, where he was reporter for the Tennessean, a wonderful paper, I might add. And then, of course, at a young age, he received that call of what I call a noble call of purpose, higher purpose, to run for public office. So our campaign was a very dynamic, a very inspiring campaign that inspired 50 million Americans to turn out on Tuesday, November 7th. We ran a very good campaign because we had a candidate who I believe not only cared about the issues that he talked about, but he was willing to fight for them and willing to fight for the American people. A candidate who not only was pro-environment, but pro-choice, pro-civil rights, and I believe that a candidate for the 21st century. I was proud to be a part of that campaign and proud to have many of my colleagues here from the Gore-Lieberman campaign here as well to talk about what we did right. But as you all know, sometime I learned this from reading a little bit about Gandhi since being here, that joy lies in the attempt, in the fight, in the suffering involved, not in the victory itself.
And do you agree with that, Rick? She left me speechless, as she always does. Donna is really a preacher wrapped up in a political person. Donna, you said that you had a war story or two that you wanted to share with us. I was wondering if you'd be willing to do that.
Well, I think this is useful because the day Al Gore asked me to be campaign manager, he quoted scripture. He knew how to get to my heart. By the way, it was the first time I ever had a proposal, made, and I accepted, of course, to move to Tennessee and to manage his campaign. But my great story is that on that day going down to Tennessee on Air Force 2, it was a tremendous day, a beautiful day, and I called my dad, who's a veteran of the Korean War, and I said, Lionel, you won't believe this, but I got another job. And he said, well, what is it? I said, I'm going to run and manage Al Gore's campaign. He said, oh, I see. It's just another job, though. But I have many other war stories. It was a tremendous journey, and one that I'll never forget anytime soon, and I'm glad to be here to share some more war stories. I have a lot. And also I have wounds. Many of you know that one of the beauty of being involved in any kind of sport, since we'll use that metaphor from time to time here, is that you walk wounded from the battlefield. But those wounds are well spent and well deserved when you're fighting for working families and fighting for health care for children so that no child is left behind. And those were the good reasons why we fought this. And if we have to do it again, we'll just have to get 50 million plus and then allow all of those votes to be counted as well.
Okay, Rick.
Well, it's an interesting question. Why does anybody run for President of the United States? In fact, almost any office, the same question applies. In fact, all you budding campaign managers out there, it's a great question to ask the guy when he asks you to run his campaign. Give him a pad and tell him, why am I running for whatever office it is, and write down on one piece of paper, if they can hold it to that, exactly why. Because it's a tough question for most people running. The concept of running is a lot easier than knowing why you're doing it. And if you got someone like I did with John McCain, who understood very clearly why he was running, it makes it that much more simple and inspirational. The McCain campaign was the most fun I've ever had in politics. Probably will spoil me for some time to come, but we never know. When I was involved in Ronald Reagan's campaign in 1980, I thought I'd never see another campaign like that. But I surely have seen something different. And when he ran as an insurgent for president, he did it with a firm understanding that it was against all odds, that the likelihood to win, the capturing the prize, wasn't half the race. It was a small part of it. And not dissimilar to what we've been talking about all day today, is it's the motivation that fuels whether or not you can be successful, and a lot of good lucky breaks. And maybe a good counting machine every now and then, I guess, I don't know. But obviously that's one of the themes we're picking up. I've got no horse in that race. So and so I do think that it brings us some interesting stories that we'll discuss today, but I would have to say that the stories that I really like from our campaign trail were the level of emotion, the level of excitement and activity that took place in what otherwise was already considered sort of a done deal. And I saw something in politics that most people deride, which is real people actually got excited about doing something in politics, that it's not just sort of this elite group that can go to the Kennedy School of Government and make it a living, but truck drivers and waitresses and folks just making a living, showing up at town halls and rallies and frankly turning out to vote. Yeah. We created a whole new group of voters in America off of just a couple of primary states, and by the thousands. And I hope that kind of intensity carries on to some degree. I'm blessed by the fact that there are still people willing to clap when you say McCainiac, and that was easy to, and not as many as I used to think. And so I think that's part of the legacy that I really enjoy, is the fact that there's still a role to play and there's still good things to be done, and we appreciate the support that you've given us to this point.
Okay, Gina.
Well, first, let me say something about Donna.
Uh-oh.
You learned it all too well.
Thank you, Gina.
But and something else too. I mean, Donna, her first trip was on Air Force Two. My first travels with Bradley was in his 1981 Pontiac, which is very famous for having very old cars. I think it's sort of symbolic of the way the race began. There was a presumed inevitability about the vice president's nomination, and Bill Bradley chose to challenge that inevitability because he felt he had something to say to the American public. He wanted to put forward his views, be they on poverty and race and the environment and working families and global issues. And this was the year he wanted to do it. People had been waiting a long time. You're all too young to know that in 1988, people wanted to know if Bill Bradley was going to run. In 1992, people wanted to know if Bill Bradley was going to run. And by the time we got to 1998, which is actually when he first announced in December, I think it was the best kept secret. I don't think anyone here who's from the press could tell you that they knew 3 days before they were going to have to rush up to Newark, New Jersey, to the community center to hear Bill Bradley announce that he was going to have an exploratory campaign, which is very much in his style. And I think that the campaign was as exciting as Rick said. A lot of new people came into it, and that was a very exciting part of it. I think that we had a journey through 1999 in expectations, which I think rose well beyond where the campaign thought we could be, and it affected actually what happened afterwards, and we can talk a little bit about that. And I think that it was enriching for certainly everyone who was part of the Bradley campaign, especially that person up there who applauded. Thank you very much. And this is about as close as I'm going to get to the White House, clearly. I'm happy to be here.
Come on over for lunch.
Thank you.
Yeah. To the mess.
And I will have a chance to talk more about it.
Thank you. Carl?
Thank you, first of all, the Institute of Politics. Last September, there were a group of political scientists and academicians who gathered to forecast the general election, and every single one of them agreed that the election, because of the peace and prosperity in the country, was clearly going to be Al Gore's victory by an average of 11 points in your dreams. And yet, it did not turn out that way. And the reason is pretty simple. We had an extraordinary candidate who ran a different kind of race, talking in a language that it was unusual for a Republican to talk. He talked about educating every child and teaching every child to learn to read, and did so not merely from the talk, but having seen such a program put in place under his leadership in Texas. He talked about confronting poverty by encouraging faith-based and community organizations to confront the suffering. He talked about reforming Social Security, the so-called third rail of American politics, which no politician was supposed to be able to touch and still survived. He talked about a new approach to America's military needs, taking the step, if need be, to unilaterally reduce our nuclear stockpiles as part of a new strategic posture. And he talked about a market-based approach to healthcare issues that was compassionate and conservative at the same time. I'm not certain I have very many good stories. For me, though, this race began in an odd way. It began in 1997 when Karen Hughes walked into the governor's office in Texas and said, "You're leading in the polls." And he said, "For what?" And it had a surreal ending on the night of December 12th when I sat in the McLean Hilton in my pajamas watching NBC News, sitting on the telephone with the governor of Texas in his pajamas in Austin, trying to figure out exactly what the U.S. Supreme Court was saying. I said it's good news because I was watching NBC. He was watching CNN and said, "No, it sounds like bad news to me." Finally, I got him to watch NBC, and he said, "Well, it may be good news, but I'll tell you what, I'm calling a lawyer now."
Well, let me start out by saying just how unusual it is to have 3 women campaign managers here. When I was... I never thought I'd see this day, and I think it's so wonderful. So if you don't mind, I would like just to ask the three women on the panel, just very briefly, to talk about, do you see this as an unusual development? Are you know, what it was like to run a campaign as a woman? Were there any particular problems, or was it just as it would be if it was one of these guys? You know, just talk a little bit about that role, because you do represent something that's new. Okay, Gina.
As the elder stateswoman on the panel here, it's about time. I mean, when you think about it, you know, we're in the 21st century, and Maxine has to say this is an extraordinary moment. So I think it is, you know, real important. I'll make my pitch briefly to those women, and I hope there are more up there. You know, to become part of this process. There's a lot of opportunity. I don't know Teresa, but I know Donna, and I know that she and I worked in politics, worked on behalf of people we believed in, developed relationships with people in the world of politics and government that ultimately led to our being chosen to be a campaign manager. I will tell one story. Bill Bradley was my third choice in 1978 when he ran for the U.S. Senate in New Jersey. And it's probably a story to tell so that you know it's okay, you know, to have candidates who, you know, you're for, you devote yourself to, and later on you find yourself in a position to be not only supportive, but a part of someone who you opposed. I obviously at the time thought he was a basketball player trading on his name to become a U.S. Senator, and then learned very quickly to respect him when he became a U.S. Senator, and ultimately developed a friendship and relationship with him that turned into his request for me to be his campaign manager. I think, at least in the Bradley campaign, there were no obvious sort of differences because a woman was running the campaign. Bill Bradley in particular always had very strong women in key positions throughout his political life. His first campaign manager in 1978 was a woman. His first chief of staff in his Senate office was a woman. He nominated the first woman U.S. attorney in New Jersey. I mean, people who knew Bill Bradley were accustomed to women being in leadership positions. And you know, in the beginning of this campaign, obviously, there was a small cadre of people who knew Bill Bradley who were willing to stand up and say they were for him in the face of a campaign against the sitting vice president. So I think it grew from there. And so I didn't find any, you know, obvious challenges beyond those of the everyday running of the campaign.
Well, I was quite an anomaly in many other ways. I was the first African-American woman to run a major presidential campaign. So I think in the beginning it was somewhat strange because all of a sudden I became a role model, and I kept saying, oh, I would want any of my children to grow up to be like me, unless they washed their mouth out with soap. But I grew into it. I like Gina and like, you know, Maxine, and I'm sure like Teresa, I can get down with the boys. I'm scrappy, and I know how to pick a target and aim and go for it. I've learned from the best. This wasn't my first campaign, it was my 7th presidential 55 congressional campaign, and yes, I like to take out Republicans as often as I possibly can. It's a sport for me. I am so partisan that when the fire burns in my fireplace, I try to set it by just touching it. But that is because I come out of a tradition where it's not unusual for women to speak up and to lead and to talk. The civil rights movement, the women's movement, which those two movements are also a part of who I am and my experience, as well as other movements in this country for progressive, nonviolent social change. So I am proud of the fact that Al Gore allowed me to serve in this capacity, as well as the men and women, David Morehouse, who's here, who had to, of course, deal with my special brand of managing, which, you know, I come from the grassroots side of the equation. Teresa, we're not all corporate big heads, pig heads, dual heads, whatever that notion Some of us come from the streets and have never quite been in the suites. And if we got there, we would add another chair because we would add a different type of gumbo to the serving tray. But it was wonderful, and I had wonderful, great experiences. And yes, there are times when I took on the boys. I call them, it was an affectionate term. I took them on, and I loved the relish of fight. But when it was time to go to battle, boy, 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 they were my brothers. And they're still my brothers. Michael Hooley, I would always say, Michael Hooley is my brother because he's the last Democrat that believed in grassroots organizing. And finally, after months of telling everybody that Michael Hooley was my brother, he finally said that I was his half-sister. So I've come far in this life, and Al Gore is always like Bill Bradley. He's always maintained strong women around him, along with Tippa and Corinna, his daughters, 3 daughters, his mother, Pauline, of course, Elaine K. Mark, our senior policy advisor, Laura Quinn, our communication director, Lisa Brown, our lawyers, Lisa Burry. I can go on and name many other sisters who also served in tremendous capacities. But I hope and I encourage every young person in this, and old people too, because I'm heading toward that Social Security and call, make sure you don't destroy that program.
No change for those at or near retirement.
Please don't.
But if you're a younger worker, your choice.
Lockbox. But let me encourage every young person, and this is where I take off my party hat, which is not often. I mean, this is our country. This is the greatest country in the world. I've traveled a long way from my days of growing up near the banks of the Mississippi. And there's no better country than this country. But this is our country, and it's your future. It's your turn. You must serve. You must get involved. You must speak out and stand up. And, of course, you must go out and vote. Thank you.
Well, I can remember standing right in this room in 1984 and watching Geraldine Ferrara debate and crying. It was the first time I had seen a woman in that capacity, and I thought, go, go, go. We need all kinds of women in politics. We need all kinds of students in politics, and I want to echo what Donna said, is because you look at the demographics, and every time the 18 to 24-year-olds, it always comes up that they're not voting, they're not participating. Yes, they're volunteering, they're getting involved in different ways, but they're disgusted with politics as usual. We need as many young people in politics in this country as possible. And it's not just we need more women in politics, we need everybody in politics.
Agree.
Thank you. You know, looking at these 5 people, another way to slice this, of course, is that Donna and Carl are the establishment, representing the 2 traditional parties, and the other 3 are challengers in one form or another. And I thought maybe it would be fun to just maybe starting with Rick and giving Rick and Carl a chance to speak since we let the women speak. Talk a little bit about, you know, in this conference upstairs, there's a theme, there's a sub-theme, which is that there are 100 million people out there who are not participating, and is there a way to tap that group? And the question is whether you can reach them through traditional politics, whether there's some way that they can be energized and we can have more fuller participation. So I don't know, Rick, if you can sort of talk about the role of the challenger and how that works sort of in a broader sense.
Well,
and then I'm going to let you defend as the ultimate establishment.
You talking to me?
I'm talking to you.
can I cede my time to Donna?
I'll take it.
Kind of entertaining. The really, I mean, not so much a challenger versus the establishment, but each campaign is unique, and sometimes establishment isn't what you think an establishment is, and frankly, in our case, sometimes a challenger isn't exactly what you would think a challenger would be. I mean, John McCain was in the U.S. Congress for 17 years and served his country since he was 16 years old. I mean, this is not a guy you would think was outside the establishment of the Republican Party by most means, but we certainly weren't satisfied with what the party was doing at the time he ran. And that was the motivation to change that. And the other aspect of our campaign, which I think was pretty obvious, was we weren't even happy with the way the Republican Party was reaching out to new voters. And I think this is something that probably the establishment and John have in common. And that is that we can't survive with the group we have. It's an ever-dwindling supply of party activists, ever-dwindling supply of voters. And parties today are not well thought of by any standard of the measure. And so certainly for John, part of his motivation was to bring in people to the Republican Party who maybe heretofore hadn't been welcome for some reason. And our message was one that probably rankled a lot of establishment people in Washington. But you know what? They think differently today after this campaign than they did before he ran. And that was part of what we were trying to accomplish. I think it opens the door for a lot of new people to come into our party. And so to some degree, by being a challenger, we may have helped create a stronger establishment. Certainly that was part of our objective.
I don't want to put you on the defensive. Okay.
Yeah,
But the question really is, how do the two traditional parties survive and energize people and get young people engaged again?
Well, I think there are two things going on there. First of all, you described the problem. I mean, half of the American people didn't register and vote in the general election of 2000. I think that's for a couple of reasons. One is I think both parties have become irrelevant. I think they had a series of sort of issue agendas that seemed to make sense sometime in the past. They made sense in the 60s, they maybe made sense in the 70s, they made less sense in the 80s, and they've made less sense in the 90s. And so both parties are sort of grappling, as they periodically do in American politics, for a new rationale, a new agenda. We've seen this before. We saw this in 1898 when both political parties had basically run the rack on the Civil War agenda of where both parties had, vote as you fought. But that became irrelevant to a rising class in America. And I think we see the same thing today with both political parties really not seeming all that relevant to a new changed set of circumstances. And the question for both political parties and for the political system itself is, what are the parties and the leaders that we elect to the presidency and to the Congress going to do to make the parties more relevant with an agenda that makes sense to the people who are sitting around today not participating? The interesting thing is that people who do not participate largely look like people who do participate, which says something really dangerous about it. It would be one thing if we could say, all right, well, this group feels somehow disenchanted and left out, and we can understand with clarity and ease why Norwegian Americans might feel, to take my class of people, might feel left out of politics. But the unfortunate thing is that it runs across the board, which says to me there is a dangerous systemic cynicism about politics that ought to be troubling to anybody who believes in the promise of America. I think I've got a different answer. A lot of people come along and say, well, what we need is campaign finance and get the corporate money out, and it's the corporations' problem. I think the problem is that we do not have enough political participation in this country because we have fundamentally weakened the two great American political parties. Starting in 1974, because of the excesses of Richard Nixon, we attacked a problem, but it's sort of the law of unintended consequences. What we did was weaken the two institutions in America which could civilize our politics, grant a voice to those that have not been heard, discuss and debate the issues that face our country in a civil and productive way, and those are the two great political parties. They're not founded in law. They're not created in the Constitution. They arose because of need. And when they have failed to serve the interests of the American people, they have dwindled and gone away. But what we've done is crippled their ability to conduct robust, aggressive, outgoing, inclusive, big campaigns that give people a reason to vote, a reason to participate, and a reason to hope.
I bet everybody on this panel agrees with that, right?
Absolutely not.
No?
I disagree with every single word that came out of that.
All right, go for it.
And I like Ralph Nader.
Who says we need the primacy of two great parties? There's got to be room for more than two parties in the United States of America, especially two parties that are unable to attract more than 100 million voters to come to the polls, because they're starting to, as at least Carl admitted this, that they're starting to not stick to a particular agenda because they're starting to look more and more the same for a lot of people. And so people who want a different kind of choice, who want to have competition, not just in the marketplace, but in the marketplace of ideas, in the political marketplace of ideas, I even hate to use the word marketplace, but to have some kind of robust competition, you don't need to give any more structural systemic advantages to the two parties here. They end up with all the advantages. Instead, we need to make sure that there's competition and that alternative voices can be heard in this process.
Well, alternative voices do get heard. I represent a party that began as a third party. The Republican Party began as an anti-slavery movement because the two major political parties at the time failed to meet the need. But there are differences between the parties, but the differences are increasingly seen by the American people about issues that are no longer relevant to them. And they want leaders and agendas who can call on the best of America, not engage in sort of the hyper-partisan, needless partisanship that we've seen coming from both camps over the last 8 years. Now, let me say one other thing about two parties. Sure, let 3 parties, 4 parties, 5 parties blossom. But we better remain a country with 2 major political parties, or our democracy is ill-suited for any other kind. We do not want to become the sort of the Italy of the North American continent with a change of governments every 6 months because we are paralyzed. This country was built by an active, robust national government that pursued limited goals for great purposes, and a parliamentary system with 20 parties or 5 parties or 10 parties would make it impossible for this country to function.
But this party was also built... This country was also built on the ideas of third parties. The abolition of slaves came from third parties. Women's suffrage came from third parties. The graduated income tax, reduction of deficit. If you look across the board, how justice has been advanced in this country, it's because when the two parties failed, third parties brought up other ideas and said, we can look better as a country. We can do better as a country.
No, Teresa, that's right. But the history of our parties, the two parties, are that we learn from those movements and they get consumed by the two parties. And the two parties change as a benefit of that. But I would say one thing, though. I mean, we really need to walk the walk. I mean, my campaign, John McCain's campaign, was dedicated to bringing new people in. We accomplished that goal. It is possible under the two-party system to be able to attract a lot of new people. But that also means that we ought to allow same-day registration and have open primaries and allow people to get on the ballot if they need to get on the ballot. And so let's have our system structured so that when we do make the case, which I think in this campaign we began the process of doing that there are no barriers to entry to participation in politics.
I'm agreeing with 2 Republicans, by the way.
I know, me too.
I know. I'm just going. Don't tell nobody.
All right. Now we're gonna take some questions. You'll be able to continue. Please introduce yourself and put your question in the form of a question. Thank you. Hello. We're gonna go like this.
All right. Sorry, I'll just shout it. I'm Josh. I'm a sophomore. I'm curious who you all modeled your campaigns on. I mean, some of you, I'm sure, there it is. Some of you, I'm sure, probably tried to run a campaign like nothing else before, and some, like Mr. O, for example, I don't want to give you a heart attack by comparing your campaign to Clinton's campaigns in the past, but it seems like you both had similarities in that you had young governors who tried to talk like moderates to reach out to new people. So if you had campaigns that you modeled your campaigns on, I'm curious what your inspirations were for the campaigns that you ran. All of you.
Anybody want to address the question of having had a model?
I don't believe we had a particular model, but
Right.
I agree with you about how they modeled theirs.
Actually, we modeled ours on William McKinley's 1896 run for the president. Because McKinley faced the same kind of situation we faced, which was that the 2 major party agendas were largely exhausted, and he knew that the Republican Party could not survive as a white Anglo-Saxon party, Protestant party. And he reached out to Catholics and immigrants and the new urban working class and created a Republican governing agenda that lasted until the 30s.
Thank you. Up here.
Actually, I was going to say Teddy Roosevelt was our model, but we didn't get put on the ticket, so.
I can tell you one thing that is an axiom, and that is that, if you model your campaign around the last campaign, you're running the wrong campaign.
Right.
And so, the one thing that I know we as Democrats often do is we tend to look at what happened last time and overcorrect. And that's just a mistake. Each campaign is very unique. And that's why it's an opportunity for you all to get involved, because each time there'll be a unique circumstance with unique chances to have an impact.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maya Smith, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. My question is directed to Mr. Rove and Ms. Brazil in particular, and it refers to the idea of voter turnout. And I wonder what your thoughts are about the impending legal junctions regarding preventing voters from getting to the poll in Florida and throughout the nation, in particular voters of color. I've been since informed that the Republican Party spends close to $5 million annually to set up a Republican machine for whatever purpose to serve to kind of prevent voters from getting to the poll. I would like to remind everyone that we are only 40 years out of the Jim Crow era, and that this was a very common practice during that time. So if you two would address that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Donna, want to go first?
Well, when I talk about wounds, there's still a lot of raw emotions and a lot of hard feelings and and it won't end until we do take on real serious election reform in this country. I think it's long overdue. I think the barriers that were placed before some voters, not just in Florida but across the country, should be removed, and they should never be put up again. I'm not familiar with the lawsuit filed on behalf of many of the disenfranchised voters in Florida, but I do know that there are a number of lawsuits, and I'm sure that at some point in the near future those suits will go public. I do know that we worked very hard on the Democratic side to turn out as many voters as possible. I know I spent my entire life not only going out into some of the toughest places in this country, trying to urge people to register and then to get them out to vote. And it was quite an amazing journey, the 36 days in Florida. I have a sister who lived in Florida, and she had to produce 3 forms of ID. It didn't make me feel good that day to hear from her, but I heard from a lot of other voters that day. And I do believe that the Bush camp, and as well as our camp, we're both interested in trying to find meaningful reform that could come out of Florida so that we can begin to try to heal some of those wounds. And I don't take the position that, and I know this is going to be strange coming out of my mouth, I don't take the position that that the Republican Party tried to prevent people from voting. I take the position that we had inadequate voting machines, we had faulty voting machines, we had poll workers who didn't know what they were doing, we had people who were not trained, people who needed voter education, and that's a job that we both should take on in the future if we want to, get our vote out and also have them counted. But we learned a big lesson, and I hope something come out of Florida, and not just hurt feelings and wounds.
Yeah, first, I'm not familiar at all and doubt the existence of a $5 million slush fund to drive down voter turnout. They're the idiotic expenditure of money, and nobody in Republican National Committee is doing that. I agree with Donna. We ought to look for good lessons out of Florida. One good lesson is that this is a problem of both parties. 47 out of 67 counties in Florida have their elections overseen by panels that consist of 2 or 3 out of 3 Democrats. In fact, the 3 counties in Florida with ostensibly the greatest election difficulties, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Broward, have election commissions with 1 out of 9 members are Republicans. 8 out of 9 are not Republicans. And these are the counties where we had the greatest problems in the election. There is a tendency by local election officials to scrimp and save when it comes to reliability of machines of the voting process. And the problem is tolerated for years and years and years. I don't know if anybody is here from Albuquerque, New Mexico, but my personal favorite election story this year is New Mexico, because on election night, Bush was 11,000 votes behind. And the next day in Bernalillo County, they found that they'd failed to count a mere 55,000 votes that had somehow or another not been put through the machines. And guess what? This is every election for the last 20 years, Bernalillo County has had similar major malfunctions in its election process, and yet people don't fix it. This is a state that Bush lost by 366 votes. They found out several days later that the machines were programmed incorrectly in 27 counties in the state that counted optical scan ballots. So if you voted the straight party ticket and voted for the presidential candidate as well, it kicked your ballot out altogether when it was a legitimate under state law ballot. So they had to rerun the votes in some of those counties. So this is a problem that cuts across both lines, and hopefully out of the bipartisan task force that Speaker Hastert has set up, there's one member of the United States Congress who's a former Secretary of State, and he's the chairman of this, and hopefully out of that committee will come some good ideas how to confront this problem.
Okay, up here, please.
Hi, my name's Leslie Fulmer, and I'm an MPP 1. I'm interested in knowing what's one thing that you would have done differently looking at your campaigns now. In particular, I'd be interested in hearing from Mr. Rove and Ms. Brazil, but it's directed to all the candidates.
What one thing would you have done differently?
I think I would have, I wish we could have started the campaign in Tennessee. That's the one thing, and of course, count all the votes. Got to get there all the time. But starting the campaign in Tennessee would have given us a tremendous boost and allowed us to focus the crucial early months of a presidential campaign and setting up our organization and getting out our message and getting the candidate off to a right start. Instead, we moved down there halfway and throughout halfway in the primary campaign. So that's the only thing I would have done differently.
Carol?
It's hard to pick one thing because we made so many mistakes, most of which I'm personally responsible for, incidentally.
You got a big job.
Yeah, well. Yeah, I'm glad we ended the campaign in Tennessee. First, I wouldn't have underestimated John McCain's month of August of '99 spent in New Hampshire because it gave him an insurmountable lead and he beat the hell out of us as a result. Second, I'd find that guy who turned on the microphone on Labor Day and it was Third, I would have found a way to spend a little bit more time in New Mexico, Oregon, Iowa, and Wisconsin. We lost those 3 states with their 30 electoral college votes by 17,000 votes. 3 of the 4 we last won in 1984. I wish we'd spent just a little bit more time. I wish we'd moved earlier in Minnesota. We moved late in Minnesota. We came within 2 percentage points of winning a state that we last won in 1984. And finally, I wish I hadn't been the stupid guy who said, yeah, let's challenge Gore to early debates. The press will hold him to his commitment to join us on Meet the Press anytime, anywhere. Let's get the debates rolling sooner rather than later. We can stiff Frank Fahrenkopf in the Presidential Debate Commission, and by God, get on television early and have that great debate on Meet the Press, because the press will stand with us and hold Gore's feet to the fire on this. And of course, they didn't.
Okay, Gina. Mistakes?
Well,
Regrets?
Go ahead, Gina. Ladies first.
Obviously, we have a couple. I think we never found a way to make people believe. I alluded to this in my first comments, that even though we raised a lot of money and looked like we were equal to Al Gore, we were never an equal to Al Gore, and we could never convince anyone that this was a rough race as we got closer and closer. Actually, it may have helped you, Donna, that all that turmoil happened, because it made it look like I think we had a much stronger chance than we did, so that when the numbers in Iowa were what they were, it turned out that seemed like a much greater defeat than, in fact, it might have been had people had lowered expectations. I think that we would have been smarter if we had thought harder about that 5-week period between New Hampshire and March 7th, because the Republicans had all the attention during that period. We couldn't get any attention during that period. We couldn't figure out how to get any attention during that period. There was a cartoon, which some of you may have seen, of Jennifer Lopez sort of undressing, saying, "I'm trying to get attention for Bill Bradley." It would have been good if we could have figured some way to get more attention during that period. And of course, I think it's appropriate conventional wisdom that if we had responded more quickly, more dramatically to the attack on the healthcare program, we would have been advantaged. Rick? I see everyone agrees.
I don't know. I sort of agree with the attitude everyone's taken. I mean, there's never any one thing I think that you could have done to change the course of events that took place. And certainly there were so many different things that you could have done in our election, because we tried all kinds of new stuff, and who knew whether any of that was ever going to work, that it's hard to pin down. I mean, there are obvious things. The one glaring issue that really, I think, helped cost us the nomination was South Carolina. And, you could probably run through a list of 200 different options to do different things in South Carolina. So I'd say that whole bag of South Carolina tricks would have to be examined en masse. And so I think that's pretty much it. But there is one thing, and it's not a really high technology, cool strategy thing, but it's probably to get more sleep. I'm sort of serious about this. I mean, when you're running campaigns in the future, make sure your candidate and you get a little shut-eye. We had this wonderful roller coaster. I mean, when we got on, in like December of 1999, that thing never dipped. It just kept going up and around and up and down. And you allow that to take over the activities of your campaign, and you're surfing then. I mean, and you're banking on the wave never cresting. And you need to get some sleep. And I know that we went probably 3 months without a day off. And when we finally had the day off, we realized what we were missing. And by then, it was too late. So I think that you got to make sure that this campaign, any campaign, politics runs on people. And when that's your number one resource that come in and out every day, all your assets go home and they turn off the light. There's no machine that makes this work. It's only people. And if they aren't tuned up and ready to go right, you're not going to get the asset you want out of it.
Okay. Teresa, any regrets?
No. I don't have the experience of these four folks, and so my assessment is a little bit different, and I hope it would be encouraging to everybody in the room. Not only had I never run a presidential campaign, I had never run any campaign, and what we did is we ran a totally different kind of campaign, because we weren't trying to be like the two parties. We were running a grassroots campaign, and we had two candidates, Winona LaDuke. You mentioned women. We had a female vice presidential candidate, Winona LaDuke, a great activist, as well as Ralph Nader, who were typically outsiders who were fighting against the powers. But we started in February, and so if there was one thing that I would have said that had to be different, is that you can't wait till February of the election year, because of the extraordinarily hurdles that are put for third parties to get on the ballot. I mean, people don't understand you have to collect 51,000 signatures in North Carolina and 37,000 signatures in Texas, and all kinds of hurdles that you can't really overcome successfully, especially if you're not taking any soft money or corporate money or PAC money, and you're running a real grassroots campaign and starting from scratch.
Hi, my name is Nikki Usher. I'm a sophomore at the college. This question is addressed to all of you, and I'm just curious if you could pinpoint one specific piece of press criticism that affected the way you change, or possibly caused you to change the structure of your campaign.
Influence of the press.
Didn't impact us at all.
Yeah, right.
You guys bought the ink.
Rick?
Well, we had a somewhat unconventional structure to our campaign. Our communication staff was 4 times larger than our political staff. And that was like 6 people versus 2, that kind of thing. And so I would say that there was an added asset put to bear on dealing with the media. We try to deal with them on a 24 cycle. You know, so much now as you go on a morning show and it's the wire story at 2 a.m. that they ask you questions from, and we like to try and influence the wire story at 2 a.m. So we tried to run a around-the-clock operation, because nowadays, you know, it's not like you can send out your press release in the afternoon and go home. So those kind of demands changed a lot of what we tried to do, and we tried to make good use of, in that regard, the internet and how the media now works off the internet. So many of these weeklies now have internet nightlies. So many of the dailies have internet afternoon editions. I mean, it's just amazing the reservoir of activity you can do if you think about tapping into it. And we've spent a lot of time, since we thought we had a good story to sell, tapping into earned media outlets.
Gina?
Dan, anyone want to help me out here? I can't recall something that we changed because of.
What about that picture that you talked about upstairs on the ferry?
Well, I mean,
it seemed to make such a big impression.
Right. Well, some of you may recall that there was a picture in Washington State of Bill Bradley standing alone on a ferry with a coffee cup, looking forlorn, which seemed to reflect the press's view of where the campaign was. Despite the fact that, 2 days earlier or the night before, there had been 4,000 young people at the University of Washington, cheering and roaring for him. But, you can try to avoid those things, and I think, we became sensitive to the way he was pictured. But nevertheless, it didn't sort of change what we could do. I think it was more an understanding of the impact once the press decides where the race is, how much of what is reported or is pictured becomes a reflection of that. And we couldn't work ourselves out of that. And I think it had a dramatic impact on the outcome of March 7th.
Anybody else want to talk about the press?
Sure. When you're a third-party candidate, you have the great privilege of being ignored by the press.
Consider yourself lucky.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we didn't consider ourselves lucky because, of course, you need the media to get your message out. And so, in response to your question, what we did do is when we realized not only was the media not going to help get the message out, we had the New York Times editorializing in June that Ralph should just get out of the race because he was, quote, cluttering the field. And so we had negative comments about just being in the race. And so we decided just to bypass depending upon the press or trying to, we held press conferences. We put out 2 to 4 press releases every day, but all they wanted to talk about was the horse race between Bush and Gore. And so we wanted to talk about more things, so we went straight to the people and said, okay, you're not going to be able to ignore us now. We're going to have 10,000 people show up in the Coliseum, or 14,000 in the Fleet Center, or 12,000 in the Fleet Center, or 14,000 in the Target Center. We sold out Madison Square Garden. Everybody paid to come hear Ralph talk for an hour and a half, and not depend upon the media to get the message out.
Yeah, look, the dirty little secret is that, everybody seems to think television ads by the campaigns have a big impact on the outcome, or that the speeches by the candidates, or the debates, or the conventions. In reality, the press is the biggest player in the political drama. Every day you think about how do we structure our day and how do we structure what we say, and what is it that we need to do in order to gain the maximum amount of positive coverage from the press. And to answer that question, you got to think about the minds and the souls and the prejudices and the desires and the small wants and big needs of about 20 people who are covering you on the plane and represent the major networks and the major print outlets and the wires. And 20 years ago or 30 years ago, if you wanted to become a campaign manager, it would probably be best if you were a political science major. Maybe 30 years ago. 20 years ago, it would be best if you were in radio, film, and theater. Today, get a journalism school. Yeah. The people who, as presidential campaigns in the future, are going to, as these rules which we've laid on the parties become more and more constraining, the press will play a ever increasingly larger role in the conduct of the campaign. And so understanding the methods and madness of the press is absolutely critical.
I think we can have a whole forum on the press coverage, and I'm sure that many of my colleagues on the Gore side would love to be able to talk about the type of press coverage we received every day, which by and large we didn't like it. We thought the press was more interested in covering the horse race, the polling, all the internal stuff, and we tried to, pitch our policy proposals and all of our initiatives to individual reporters who we thought would take, our message a lot more seriously and not get involved in the day-to-day drama of and the palace intrigue of a presidential campaign. And it was also difficult because, of course, he's the sitting vice president, and we had someone in the White House who was also making news every day, and that was also difficult navigating that as well.
I agree with a lot of what Donna said. If you want to read a book on this that is really terrific, it's Out of Order by Patterson, which describes the main problems facing the press. Now, I hasten to add that Dan Balls of the Washington Post and Ron Brownstein of the LA Times and Rick Burke of the New York Times were not part of this herd journalism on the press. And if you ever get a chance to meet them, if they were, oh, Dan, I see you over there.
Oh. We've got time for 2 more questions. So, Larry, you lead off. 1 more up here, and then I'm afraid we have to shut it off.
Hi, my name is Larry Harris with the Institute here. I find it only fitting that on a college campus we talk about your campaign's relationships with young people. It seems that in some of the campaigns, the issues were tailored to speak to young people a little bit better than in the other campaigns. And I wonder if you could talk about your efforts to get the young vote out and how your candidate tailored his message about, general policy to speak to young people.
We looked at 1996 and saw a 14-point deficit among young voters for the Republican ticket and realized that could not stand. So when Bush began his campaign, we had an aggressive effort on campuses, but more importantly, we emphasized the issues like education and the language and rhetoric like his approach to Social Security in a way that would talk to young people. We also bought our television in a way that we, particularly, for example, on Social Security, made certain that we skewed the buy towards younger voters so that we could talk to them about the opportunity to have a personal retirement account. And this helped. We had a 12-point swing among younger voters, which was one of the bigger swings in the election.
Yeah, I think certainly the Bradley campaign and Bill Bradley himself attracted younger voters. I mean, he was part of the original strategy was to engage younger voters, make them turn out in greater numbers than they had, and participate in the campaign. And if you were to look at where we did well in Iowa, the calls that were coming from the college campuses, and we had the great advantage of Paul Wellstone, who when he went to a college campus, the entire campus joined the Bradley campaign. So there were, 500, 600 students, standing outside of Grinnell College. Now, as you may know, in Iowa, winning those, 3 caucus votes versus over here where 25 seniors showed up and you still won only 3 caucus votes. The numbers, didn't count in the overall, but it did count in energizing young people. And I think the issues that he addressed, in particular around race, in particular around issues of working families and of young people, really did attract them to him and to his challenger status, which I think was part of it.
Larry, we didn't have a specific slick operation to target young voters, but we tried something a little different than we thought has been done before, and we just told the truth, basically. I mean, what we tried to do is level with voters, whether they were young people or old people. The straight talk was not just a slogan. When we traveled around, it was tough love in most places, and a lot of those were college campuses. And people were shocked at first that anybody would expect to ask for your vote and at the same time disagree wholeheartedly, but with how they felt about an issue. But what John developed over the course of the campaign, and it came out in a town hall in California, someone asked him, if you're president after 4 years, what do you want to have accomplished? And at the core of his message at that point became to inspire a generation to do things that are not in their self-interest. And from that point on, our campaign really grasped a new message that in addition to telling the truth, we didn't think that would actually get us any votes, but it's what we felt. And it's what we thought people would get energized by. And I think by being inspiring, a lot of young people came into politics for the first time, and we still see it today. So we hope we can continue that and then find other ways more tactically to approach young people and get them more involved in politics.
I believe we won the youth vote last November by going to young people, where they live, where they eat, where they play, where they pray, and of course we participated in many forums, MTV Forum, along with Corinna Gore, who founded GoreNet. We had a network of young professionals who met weekly across the country to try to also engage young professionals, but also to listen to them and the issues and to talk about, as Gina and Carl mentioned, education, a big issue, a big concern of young professionals and young people, as well as Social Security, which was another issue that concerned them, health care. So, and the environment, of course. So we took our campaign directly to young voters and listened to them and engaged them in a dialogue, and ultimately we got them out to vote as well.
And the Nader LeDuc campaign went straight to college campuses. So one of the big parts of our campaign was to focus on non-voters and new voters to bring them into the political process. We had two candidates running on the message that we're not for sale. And most young people have not sold out already and are open to new ideas and willing to listen to alternative visions for the country. And so we went directly to the campuses. We had youth coordinators. We had 900 chapters of Nader LeDuc across the country, and we're focusing on young people to build the Green Party, because young people are the energy of this country, and we need young people in politics. And Ralph likes to say, if you don't turn on to politics, politics will turn on you.
Last question up here, please.
My name is Mike Weissman. I work here at the Kennedy School. I came in a bit late, so I don't know if you already addressed this, but regarding the issue of whether the American people are best served by two strong dominant parties or a number of other parties as well, I wonder if you could address the issue of instant runoff voting, which would allow the will of people, if it's directed to third parties, to be expressed in a more powerful way than it is now, and would also allow that will to be channeled into the two major parties in a way that it most emphatically was not in this election, when you had a majority of the people voting for Nader plus Gore see their will frustrated.
I like to.
And I wonder then how
Bush plus Nader.
How do you think,
or Bush
if
plus
instant
Gore.
runoff voting were instituted, it would change the way campaigns are conducted?
Look, an instant runoff. I mean, it's been tried. It was, for example, in Georgia, it was the rule. Paul Coverdale got elected to the U.S. Senate because he got in a runoff, but the general election required you to get 50% plus one of the vote, and there were 3 or 4 candidates on the ballot, and then the runoff Coverdale won. I'm against it, despite that, because what happens is if you have runoff elections, there are runoff elections only for a few races on the ballot, not all of them, and turnout inevitably drops significantly and dramatically. So what you will do is you will have contests settled by the hardcore partisans on either side who bother to come out in an election, 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks after the general election, which a much larger number of people will vote.
Anybody else want to address that?
I think we need instant runoff voting, but we need more than that. We need to talk about this as a whole package of reforms in this country from top to bottom, starting with public financing of public campaigns, same-day voter registration, making it easier for people in this country to vote, like having a holiday or having the elections held on the weekend, so that we don't discourage people from going to the polls and continue to have a disgraceful turnout in our public elections for a country that calls itself a democracy or a democratic republic. We need to have the barriers to entry removed so that you have easier access to the ballot for more parties, that you have access to the debates through a People's Commission for presidential debates. And so we have a whole host of reforms, starting by having our legislators put their voting records on the internet. You know, all kinds of things have to happen to make this a more democratic society, including instant runoff voting, proportional representation, same-day registration, public financing, public campaigns.
Gina, Rick, and Donna, I don't know if you want to address this particular question, but if you'd like to say something in conclusion, we'd welcome it, and then we'll wind up.
Well, I must say, I agree with Carl on instant runoffs.
I do too.
I agree with Teresa on same-day registration. What's most important is for people to become involved. The way the system changes is when people become involved in it. You know, you can't complain about it if you're on the outside of it. And I think Donna and I would agree that, you know, we live in a party that is robust. It has its problems, but it has, and Carl is right, we need to reinvigorate the parties. I think that's right. And young people like yourselves can do that. There is plenty of room.
Yes.
I'm tired. You know, I need your help. The country needs your help. It is important to get involved. No one should be discouraged by hearing the difficulties, but should be encouraged by the opportunity to take on those challenges. And so I would encourage each of you to do that. There are candidates like Bill Bradley, who I think inspired a lot of young people, and they today, just let me say, the Bradley campaign did not attract a lot of sort of traditional folks who had been through 5 or 7 presidential campaigns. It attracted a whole new group of young people. And this year, in 2000, they ran congressional campaigns. They were field directors for U.S. Senate campaigns. They are now press secretaries for elected officials, including governors. They became part of this political system, and they started out in the Bradley campaign and now are bringing their views, their talents to it. And that is an opportunity you should understand exists and take advantage of it.
Well, I would just say that I echo the sentiments that we've all said today about needing to open up the process and bring in more people. To some degree, the message is a little lost on you because you have a great deal of opportunity here at this fine institution to be involved at a level most Americans would never even understand. So I think it's really incumbent upon you to take that message out to the community, and there is one here in Massachusetts or wherever your hometown or home country is, and try to get more people who aren't given the opportunity that you're given here. Be responsible about it. The one thing I think this election should have taught everybody is you don't know what's going to happen next. And I applaud the activities and efforts of everybody here on the panel. This is a real experience to be able to be seated with a group of people who've just changed American politics in front of you. And obviously we owe it all to the candidates that were there, but we've all experienced something that is unique. And that lesson of not knowing the outcome before it is given is what politics is all about. And so if you ever thought that you couldn't make an impact, or that you hear somebody say something like, my vote doesn't count, I'm not going to do it today, remind them of the 2000 presidential election, and that's all you got to say, because most people have figured that much out. So again, thank you very much. I appreciate all the hospitality you've given me over the last few months, and certainly appreciate all the activities that you've done here tonight.
Thank you. Well, I guess there's so many quotes I have from the Bible, but I'm going to separate church from state for a moment. This is, as we all summed up a couple minutes ago, I was listening to Carl and say, I agree with Carl 3 times tonight. I hope that doesn't change the way I look at life tomorrow. But it just goes to show you live long enough and you exhale, you can breathe in new thoughts. And Carl, I'm glad to see that you're opposed to runoff primaries, because runoff primaries in the past diluted the voting strengths of minorities, especially in the South. And so I hope we don't return to runoff primaries anytime soon. I also would like to say on a closing note that this is a fine institution, and as an LSU grad, it's good to be at the LSU of the North. So that's what I call LSU the Harvard of the South. So now I'm up north. And it's an honor and it's a great pleasure to be with so many fine people and distinguished leaders, and of course, to be here with Senator Pryor and so many of my colleagues from Campaign 2000. Let me just end by saying what Gina said. This is a wonderful nation, a great country, wonderful political parties, and for many of you to get involved in. And I would hope that after you have finished up your 4 years or your 2 years here, that you get involved. And while you're still studying, you get involved and make those phone calls and help to register voters and help to open up the political process to more people so that you can one day run a presidential campaign like those of us here. So thank you so much for allowing us to be here.
I'm going to give the senior advisor to the president the last word.
Well, first, thanks you all for being here, and thanks again to the Institute for hosting us. And I want to say one of the nicest things about the campaign for me was it started on the night of February 31st, when Donna and I ended up having dinner together late one night in New Hampshire.
That's January 31st in Manchester. That's right.
Manchester, and it's been great to know Donna. Donna's a patriot. She cares about the system. She cares about her country, and I admire her fighting spirit. It was great to be on the opposite side of her because I respected her so much. We've all sort of struck a semi-corny note about how you can make a difference. And the scary thing is it's true. And the scary thing is that you have the opportunity. I can remember sitting in a similar room at the original Institute of Politics, the Hinckley Institute of Politics at my alma mater, the University of Utah, and having an anti-war professor named J.D. Williams tell me that you can make a difference. And he was my mentor. He's still alive. He's the Democrat National Committee man for the state of Utah.
That's right.
Now, he's not really certain what happened to me along the way. But I will tell you, I talked to him after the election, and it just almost made me cry because he said, I cannot tell you how proud I am that you got involved and stayed involved and care for your country. And that's what it really boils down to. You have a chance to act on your desire to be involved in politics. You'll have a lot of opportunities. I hope you have the opportunity that those of us here tonight had. Win or lose, being involved in a presidential campaign is an experience that I will never forget.
Right.
I wish I'd kept a diary in this campaign. I pledged to myself that I would at the beginning, but it got lost somewhere along the way.
Same here.
Because this is the most extraordinary moment. The friendships that were born out of this, the challenges that are thrown in your way, the highs and the lows. There's no way to describe what is possible and available to you if you just take a chance. Now, I'm an old guy now. I used to be a young guy, but I will tell you this. In the campaign, and Donna saw it in hers, you know, I think the average age in our campaign was 26 or 27.
Yeah.
I mean, the policy people were in their 20s and had just finished their clerkship or had just gotten out of Stanford or just finished, were taking the law school. We're going to take the LSAT after the campaign got over. We had kids who put off their junior and senior years to play major roles. We had a kid who had never been involved in a campaign, who walked in the headquarters, became, within a few weeks, the political director for a region of the country, and today is sitting over at the age of 24 as an associate director of the Office of Political Affairs in the White House. Who would have thought 3 or 4 years ago? So if you have a chance to be involved in a campaign, if you care about your country, if you want to have an exciting opportunity, grab it, because you will never know where it will lead.
Thank you.
Amen.
Carl, thank you. Can y'all imagine what we've just been through? Where else but at the Kennedy School of Government, the Institute of Politics, the United States of America, in a democracy, where else could we come together like this? This is as good as it gets. Thank you so very much. I know that it is a ticketed event, but 8 o'clock is the forum on Monday night for Tom Brokaw. Let me invite all of you, and don't all of you come, please, because our room is too small. But at 12 noon, I'm hosting a little brown bag lunch right around the corner in the downstairs conference room for one of the candidates of this past election. Governor Lamar Alexander of Tennessee will be here. He is with the Kennedy School this semester. Please grab a Coke and a sandwich and come. Have a great weekend, and thank all of you very much. Y'all are just so good.